Hey IB environmental students, we're going to be talking about GOs and NGOs today, our last objective in 4.3 this year. Alright, what's a GO and an NGO? Well, an NGO is a non-governmental organization. Our two examples are going to be the World Wildlife Fund and Greenpeace. A GO is a governmental organization, and our two examples are the UNEP and UNESCO. Let's compare how they work. We're going to do this through a table. And there's going to be pros and cons of both types of organizations and how they conserve biodiversity. For instance, their use of the media is very different. The media for a GO is going to be prepared very carefully. Since it's a governmental organization, they have to be very careful about what they say. They don't want to upset any political parties or make any drama in the government. The NGO, on the other hand, they are going to be much more extreme with their use of media. They can do it quickly. They're going to be trying to evoke an emotional response out of their video footage or their news that they might put out via a letter or an article. So big picture use of the media, a lot more kind of subtle and calm for a GO, and for an NGO, usually a lot more intense or extreme. Speed of response is next. So the speed of a response for a GO is going to be very slow, and that's because they are a government-related entity. As you might know from a history class, government has a lot of bureaucracy or red tape. Because of that, when they're trying to deal with an environmental issue, they're going to deal with them very slowly. That's not because they want to do it that way, that's just because of what might happen given that they're a governmental organization. Comparatively, an NGO is not tied to a specific government entity. They are not trying to get reelected. They're not trying to get funding from sources that might not agree with their point of view. So they're going to put out information rapidly, whether it's printed resources or videos. They're going to be much more extreme. They're going to mostly be trying to get awareness and attention, and also be mostly focused on the groups that agree with them and try to get more people to support biodiversity that way. There are going to be some political constraints related to both of these types of organization. A GO is going to have a ton of political constraints. Those people who are in GOs are going to be elected officials or somehow related to elected officials, so they have to be very careful about what they say. They have to be careful about what sides of issues they take. They have to be careful about disagreements, especially if it's international. This could be a very testy type of thing to agree with one organization versus another's point of view, so they're very careful about what they do, hence why they're very slow to doing much of anything. On the other hand, an NGO is not affected by political constraints. Actually, they themselves want to affect the politics by their point of view, so they are very much going to pick their own opinion and say it. Lastly, can they enforce anything? What can they do about the actual biodiversity and conservation problems? Well, a GO, as a governmental organization, can create legislation or laws, and hopefully can prosecute somebody if they're not following them. Unfortunately, that is a lot easier on a national or regional level because that's a closer, smaller area to enforce something. Unfortunately, on an international scale, enforceability gets a little weak because internationally things are a little bit harder to deal with if people disagree. Additionally, NGOs are going to struggle on the international level, but either way, national, international, regional, they don't have any legal power. They're not a government agency. They're a non-government agency. So when they are doing something, they're mostly just trying to persuade the public and pressure government agencies. So these two are very much going to be interacting, but there's pros and cons to each. This one might be able to do laws and enforce those laws, but this one can work really fast. So we need both because they both are good at different things, but they both struggle at different things as well. Let's keep going. Let's do some examples. So we're going to start with the example of the World Wildlife Fund, which is an NGO. You should jot down a couple notes for each of them because you do need to know examples and what they're about. The World Wildlife Fund is an independent conservation organization. It has very high visible campaigns. They often come out during the winter time and in the summer to get your attention about the polar bears or the pandas. Not necessarily wrestling, even though that looks like wrestling as a acronym. So why are they doing these emotionally evoking campaigns? Well, they're trying to draw the attention of the public to persuade governmental organizations and influence policy. So the big picture, these guys themselves don't do policy, they're non-government, but they can quickly, hopefully, lobby those policymakers and advocate or promote and fund different things. So they themselves can't make the change, but they're trying to influence change. So for instance, here's one statistic. These guys were able to get the public to fund a bunch of stuff in 1995. Because of that, they were able to make huge leaps and bounds in lobbying for different things. And like I said, they're often going to work with other government agencies and non-government agencies. So these guys are good team players, and they will work with other organizations. Our next one is another NGO, Greenpeace. These are our extreme guys. They are also going to be campaigning. They use nonviolent but creative confrontational tactics. That's why we call them rather extreme. They are trying to use those extreme measures to draw attention and to have the public bear witness to some of the environmental things that are happening, especially to biodiversity. They're going to be very communicative through that creative outlet of either publishing something in print or in video form, and they're trying to affect politics, but they themselves don't make the policy. So they'll do this by providing data, making guidelines, bringing in experts, criticizing, and even lobbying. Next, the IUCN is one we've even talked about before, potentially in class. They are also an NGO. Their mission is to influence, encourage, and assist other organizations. They bring together lots of scientists. They also bring together other government agencies by giving them baseline information, such as what we might have learned about already in class, the IUCN Red List, which we learned is the way we talk about organisms and how endangered or threatened they are. So they use science and data to provide that information to the other NGOs and GOs. So these guys are also really good team players. They team play with government agencies, other NGOs, private companies, and even the community. Our next one is one of our best examples of a GEO that we're going to do today, the UNEP, which is the United Nations Environmental Program. These guys provide a vision and support for the world's conservation strategy. A lot of times for this, they'll work with the IUCN. They provide data collection and monitoring. They are involved a lot with the CITES initiative, avoiding trade problems for endangered species. They're also going to be involved with environmental management. Because they're a governmental organization, they're going to have the authority to draw up legally binding international documents and come up with conventions, potentially trying to enforce. But remember, because it's international, it is quite tough to enforce compliance because not everybody has to participate. Our last but not least we're going to do today is the UNESCO. This is another GO that stands for United Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. The mission of UNESCO as a GO is to mobilize education, build intercultural understanding, pursue scientific cooperation, and protect the freedom of expression. Notice that, again, this is a rather international organization. Actually, that's what the UN, I forgot, United Nation, my bad. They are going to have a huge sustainable development focus. Actually, we've talked about some of the things they've been involved in before in class, potentially. For instance, Agenda 21 we talked about regarding sustainable development. It focused on trying to bring the all the countries back up to speed in many different things using the Millennium Development Goals. And they also were participants in the Rio Earth Summits that we might have learned about in class. We also potentially in class have also talked about UNESCO MAB. MAB stands for Man in the Biosphere Program. Remember, Man in the Biosphere Program was trying to increase the number of international reserves. So these guys also, as a GO, are able to draw up some documents and hold international conventions, but not everybody, again, has to participate. So next time we see each other, we'll practice NGOs and GOs more, and hopefully you'll have a better understanding about how they're similar and different and have different pros and cons. All right, great job.